Hello Internet, Gino, aka That Pinguino here again with another deep look. This time I'm taking a look at Psychonauts, and the reason why I'm checking out this game today is to take a look at piggybacking, a term I learned from Mark Rosewater, the lead designer of Magic the Gathering. So piggybacking is the skill of building design around an already known and understood concept, the idea being piggybacking is simple. Instead of teaching someone your game from scratch, use things the player already knows. So that means that, for example, in something like Final Fantasy XIII, the main characters are all l'Cie, meaning that if they fail some God-given task, they will turn into crystals. That piece of jargon could be replaced by saying something like crystal curse, or curse, a term that people already readily understand and can understand that when some time passes, some sort of horrible thing will happen to you. Say crystal, people will understand maybe you turn to crystal. Now, Psychonauts makes excellent use of piggybacking because it uses a lot of real-world terminology to express what are otherwise really gamey ideas, like figments of imagination are your main collectible. They look like drawings, things that people might imagine, and they dot the world. You can understand why they're everywhere, you can understand why you should pick them up, and they are used throughout the world to both define the level that you're in and also guide you like a Mario coin, but with a little bit more story importance. You also have emotional baggage, which is another thing that sounds like a psychology term, but it also works great as a form of level design. You have the baggage itself, which is just a really great, each of the pieces of baggage just looks just so much personality in it. And then you find the tag that goes with the baggage, and then once you sort out the baggage, once you sort it all out in one level, you end up with a rank up, and it kind of makes sense. It adds a little bit of context to that very gamey idea of basically it's a mini fetch quest in every level. This idea of couching basic mechanics in kind of psychic terminology extends to health. Health is mental health. Psy-blasts are powered by psychic aggression. Confusion grenades are powered by raw psychic confusion. And so these very mental health as an idea being your health is just great. Aggression and confusion being raw emotions, also great. You have mental vaults, which are little vaults that try to keep you from finding out secrets, and then once you hit them, they open up and you gain access to this kind of flip book full of secrets. Another really good way to couch things. You also have mental cobwebs, another term that sounds vaguely clinical, that would explain why you have these walls that block levels and why you want to dust them and clean them. The more insane someone's mind, the more mental cobwebs there are. The main level select screen is the collective unconscious, which is actually a Jungian term. Jung is a philosopher, kind of writer, scholar, who basically explained this idea that there are certain concepts and certain stereotypes and characters that keep playing themselves out through human history, through literature. And he describes that as being part of a collective unconscious, that it's a very human experience that we all identify with. It doesn't mean a room full of doors where the human mind, you can go from mind to mind. But everyone is familiar enough with Jungian terms and Freudian terms that when you use them, they have enough of a meaning that people will kind of glom onto them without questioning quite as much. Something like this little rabbit. It's described to you as representing a primal fear or memory, and so it adds a little bit more context and acceptability to these otherwise disparate bits of level design. Why are there bunnies in this person's brain? Well, actually they represent a primal fear or memory. A little bit more story importance added onto the rabbit, and also more context given to why there's a rabbit there in the first place. You also have, in the physical world, a lot of use of piggybacking. For example, there is the Scavenger Hunt that you go on. Just in case Psychonauts didn't have enough collectibles, there's also this giant sheet of Scavenger Hunt items. But if you were ever a kid at a summer camp, you are probably familiar with Scavenger Hunts and how they work. And so this list of, I think it's 20 items, not only adds to the world because you're finding these items and it adds a sense of mystery with things like voodoo dolls and skulls and gold doubloons, a lot of things that you would imagine a kid really being excited to find, but it also makes sense why this otherwise pretty fetch questy sort of collectathon thing exists in the world of Psychonauts. Also, there's just the fact that you're in summer camp. Summer camp is a really big contextualization of your actions. There are all these other kids you're interacting with. It makes sense why Raz is so desperate to prove himself, and why everyone else is so laid back. It is the bridge by which you get from all these different crazy levels. The idea of a summer camp with a crazy, abandoned insane asylum in the middle of the lake, it adds a lot of context and it shortcuts a lot of explanation. The powers themselves are represented by merit badges, and that gives further contextualization for your powers. The way you get out of levels is smelling salts, because smelling salts wake you up from deep slumber. The levels themselves also employ piggybacking pretty liberally. For example, Sasha's mind is supposed to be very organized and under control, and it's represented by a Rubik's Cube. It makes sense that there's greater depth hidden within this very controlled cube. Mia, her mind is supposed to just be a tutorial for levitation, but it also doubles as a dance party, and it contextualizes levitation as a form of dance and a form of expression of joy and happiness. And so it could have just been a bunch of rings and teaching you, but the tutorial itself is given more meaning. Each of the levels of the people kind of later on also rest on kind of identifiable mental quirks. Like, for example, something being more scared of you than you are of it. That is basically what the entirety of Lungfishopolis is supposed to represent. Raz is a giant monster because Linda the Lungfish is more scared of him than he is of her. You also have Boyd's Level, the Milkman conspiracy. Boyd is kind of super paranoid, might be schizophrenic, and so the level is laid out where there are eyes in all of the bushes, there are cameras everywhere, there are spies. You can kind of see his distorted worldview in also how this 1950s lane is distorted. Then there's Fred Bonaparte's level. I don't know why Napoleon works as kind of the go-to for when a person is insane and believe they're someone else. They always seem to think they're Napoleon, but because it's Napoleon, you understand who Fred is wrestling with. If Fred just thought he was his grandfather, if he was Fred Johnson instead of Fred Napoleon, you'd have to explain who his grandfather was, you'd have to explain why he thinks he's his grandfather, but Fred being a Bonaparte, well, first there's Fred is a Bonaparte. By making him a Bonaparte, this whole thing becomes more understandable, but also by making him think he's Napoleon, for some reason that also shortcuts an understanding of his mental trauma. And then the level itself looks like a Settlers of Catan board, so he's playing a game with Napoleon, and not only is it a game, it's a game that a lot of people if they haven't played, they know what Settlers of Catan is. Now, the game doesn't function like Settlers, but it looks like it. To get from small to medium to large, you're popping corks and using them to fly, and then you're climbing up ladders. This transition could have been so much more difficult. In Gloria's level, you have mood swings being represented. Well, one, she's an actress, so you get this stage, but also the idea that her mood is reflected in the lighting does a whole lot of work on why these dualities of tone and of level design exist in the same space. It's all one stage that happens to be getting hit with a different lighting that affects the way it's interpreted and the way it plays out. Then there's the last level, Edgar and Black Velvetopia. I'm not going to talk about the Meat Circus. I can't. But in Black Velvetopia, you have the dogs. I think enough people have seen the painting of the dogs playing cards that it makes sense why Edgar is obsessed with cards. There's Black Velvet, and with the Black Velvet, it makes sense with the bullfight. And then couching all of that with a bullying story and wrestling and luchadors, you get all of these combinations of kind of Mexican and Spanish iconography, along with this art style that is very, I'm not entirely sure which country it originates in, but I associate it with Mexico and Spain. And so it does a whole lot of work really quickly. And that's the beauty of piggybacking. Making things that otherwise shouldn't make sense, make sense. So, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned a little bit about piggybacking and why it's such a great technique. Peace!